Hello and welcome to MIP TV, and with me is Bob Cook from the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy, a training school in Manchester in the UK, and also offers psychotherapy to individuals. And Bob is going to do his regular book review, and it's a bit of a left field book. This first published in Italy in 2010, came out in English in 2015. Psychodynamic Psychotherapy in Transactional Analysis by Anna Emanuela Tangallo. I think Tangallo. Yes, yes. No disrespect to that woman, but Tangallo. Yeah, it's. I think you've got to emphasise the O at the end. I stand to be corrected. So, what's this book about, Bob?
Yeah, it's a well-known TA book. As you said, it started its life in Italy because the author's Italian. Made its way to the English version in 2015. And I think most TA therapists, in terms of training, probably would have this book on their bookshelves. What its real emphasis is on the psychodynamic aspect of transaction analysis. So, Eric Berne, when he started to come to the forefront in 1960 with his creation of transaction analysis, it was very much almost like an approach which was verging on cognitive behavioral therapy, very CBT if you like. And after he died, it was taken over by three different approaches, but psychodynamic approach, a developmental approach, started to really grasp hold of the TA community, if you like. And of course, Berne was very interested in Freud's ideas of a developmental aspect to cure. So he was very much into psychodynamic theory, that the past informs the present. And this woman really captures the imagination and takes TA back to the psychodynamic heartland.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? It's one thing that people get really confused about in my experience. Psychoanalytical and psychodynamic. Psychodynamic is really rooted in the work of Freud, isn't it?
Yes.
And how the past affects the present.
Right.
Psychoanalytical is rooted in the work of Berne and how those ego states, how we move in those ego states. And I'm always struck when you say to me, Berne's early work was rather like CBT, because it was. He wasn't teaching about irrational thinking or automatic negative thoughts. He was talking about the ego states, the feelings of ourselves as children, parents, or adults, which I think a lot of people wouldn't know.
No, that's right.
I think a lot of people wouldn't know. Yeah.
Yeah, you're correct there, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because his focus, as he talked about the treatment of transaction analysis, his real focus was on the here and now and strengthening up the adult part of us through many cognitive behavioral techniques. The drama triangle, egograms, rescuer, persecutor, victim, but but there's an emphasis on cognition. Yeah,
it doesn't feel in Berne's early work there was a right amount of access to either the felt sense of self, the relationship, or indeed that kind of Freudian idea of transference and counter-transference. It was only, I get the sense, and I stand to be corrected, that kind of past material was only talked about in terms of bringing our past feelings of being a child up within scripts and that.
Yeah, I mean, in 1961, in his definitive book, Transactional Analysis Psychotherapy, and that's why I made that book, the first book I reviewed nearly 19 months ago with you now, Roy. And that's why it's the number one book I reviewed, because it's his seminal book where all these ideas are down there. Now, in that book, he does talk about a psychological heritage to do with the past informing the present. Interestingly, as you correctly say, in 1964, when we get games people play, and then he talks about his ideas on script in his later book, he surrounded himself with people who were very much into cognitive behavioral techniques. As I said, you know, the Cartman triangles and things like the egogram, would you say, and you know, different people. So I think you're right that there was almost like a cognitive behavioral set of movements. I think it came from Burns' insistence of cure quickly, if you like, and strengthening the adult. So, and his real passion in demystifying psychiatric language, and a real passion about moving away from being in therapy for 10 years, 3 times a week. So transaction analysis was much quicker, much more vibrant.
Yes, and from what you've said in your other book reviews, one of the things that influenced Byrne was this very quick fire assessments he had to do when he was in the army. He was literally having to make assessments of military personnel's mental states very quickly.
Yeah, within about 2 minutes, he had to assess healthy functioning, and also, you know, assess for insurance purposes, you know, whether they were able to go back to work and what state of mind they were in. And he had this tripartite system of parent, adult, child as a way of assessing, if you like. So you have that movement away, if you like, from the you know, deep analysis of the first 3 years of life to a much more here and now assessing model, if you want.
Yeah, and of course he borrowed the tripartite. He borrowed the tripartite view of personality from Freud, didn't he? Because the ego and the superego, although they don't map exactly across.
No, I mean, Freud's tripart model was an unconscious model, of course.
Yes.
Of, you know, the id, ego, and super ego, and Burns was a bit more linked into behavior. So if you watched a client operating, you could study they had distinct parts of the selves which you could observe behaviorally. So they are different, but the tripart system you could take, you know, from Freud if you wanted to in that way. So this book goes back to a psychodynamic heritage and talks primarily, you know, very much about how the past affects the present, and talks about stages of psychotherapy and sequences of psychotherapy developmentally. But I like that. The other things I like about this book is, and it's not taken up in many TA books, so this is something why I like this book. It has 4 or 5 chapters, 3, 4 chapters on how you can use groups, TA groups. Whereas if not many books have got that, and if you go back to the beginning, Burns' development and evolution of the TA theory came from his clinical work in groups. So TA started his life in the psychiatric groups of Carmel Hospital in San Francisco, where Burn worked with disturbed people, and he was attempting to get people to stay in their adult ego state and understand when they're in parent, adult, and child, and use groups for that dimension, where this author talks about using TA groups psychodynamically, and talks about the development of the group Imago, very much like or paralleling families, and looking at the sibling rivalries and the scripts that were played out in family orientation. So each person in the group would take on a projection of a family member, if you like. So she used groups quite psychodynamically, where Burns' use of groups wasn't quite the same. But I like the reading on how to use groups psychodynamically from a TA viewpoint, because I was a therapist who spent 30 years running TA groups.
Yes.
So it appealed to me.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? How it seems to me that the book revisits the heritage of TA, because it was born out of you know, Burns trained as a psychoanalyst, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So But he used TA groups in a different way from this author talking.
Oh, right, okay.
Byrne used groups, as I said, with the disturbed population. And he used groups very much in a way of helping people understanding when they're in the here and now and understanding when they're in the past. So the objective was different. Whereas this author is talking about how to use transactional analysis in groups in a psychodynamic way, or with the more normal neurotic population, if I could say that.
Yes. So thinking about, you said at the beginning that students of TA would be familiar with this book. What is the benefit for a student of TA? What would they take away from it, do you think?
Oh, well, what she does, I've just said that she's talking about the use of TA in groups, so they will get that to start off with. There's not many TA books around that talks about how to work psychodynamically in a transactional analysis way, so they'll take that, definitely. But also, for a lot of the chapters of the book, she revisits the concepts, the basic concepts of TA, scripts, games, ego states, and talks about them in a psychodynamic way and a developmental way. And she has the use of rich case studies to explain these basic concepts, which I like. She also talks about the influence of Heidegger and some of the early philosophers in Byrne's thinking. And I think students at all levels, first years, second years, third years, fourth years, would find some nuggets in this book.
Yes, I mean, just a mention of Heidegger, kind of speaks loudly, doesn't it? Because obviously he was a phenomenologist, and the lived experience, the lived frame of reference of someone, I think is something that comes up a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before on the review, one other plea about this book, which I like, she has a chapter on dreams. And how to analyze dreams from a transactional analysis framework. She doesn't quite go deep enough for me, but she does talk about the usefulness of analyzing the unconscious dreams in her TA practice, where I cannot think of another book that talks about dreams in the same way from a TA standpoint in the TA literature. And we've reviewed 51 books here purely on TA. And there's not one on dreams. So she touches on it. I would have liked a few more chapters. She touches on TA in dreams. She touches on groups. Well, actually 3 or 4 chapters on groups. And she also goes back to basic concepts, as well as touching on some of the philosophy and spiritual aspects of the early, framework of TA.
I mean, it sounds like a very rich book. It comes with a different perspective of TA, as you've said. There's very few books on group processing TA. It goes back to the psychodynamic origin.
Yeah.
And also it has a section on dreams.
A great section on dreams. And I think it's a nice book. And also it's a very accessible book to read. This person has a big heart, I think. She shares a lot of her clinical thinking. She shares a lot of her case studies to explain basic TA principles from a developmental point of view rather than a cognitive point of view. So it's got a lot of worthwhile nuggets for the student for this book and in fact the general reader in many ways.
Well, it sounds like a fantastic book. Psychodynamic Psychotherapy and Transactional Analysis by Anna Emanuela Tangelo. And we'll put a link in the comments below. Let's have some comments. Have you read this book? And if so, what are your thoughts on it? If you're students of counselling and psychotherapy and you've read it, put your comments in. We'd love to know your comments. As always, Bob doesn't get paid for book reviews. He does it for the love of it. And we'll be coming back in the next episode with yet another book review. So as always, Bob Cook, thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy.